whole thing's fake. It's all theater. None of it happened. No, I mean, the evidence is this really happened. And now they're going to try to take our liberties and take our free speech. But separately, the EU that champions restricting free speech on so many fronts, and Lord Monkton can speak to that, is now having this big rally. And then Obama's being criticized for not being there. I do think that was a bad move. And Obama is connected heavily to arming the ISIS rebels that we know helped arm and train these people. The girlfriend has now run through Turkey to Syria. But Lord Monkton's spoken out a lot about radical Islamification of Europe. And again, he founded the party that's promoting national sovereignty and basically getting out of the EU, that's gaining a lot of seats in the EU Parliament and in the UK, so he can speak to that. I originally last week asked them to try to get him on this week about the record cold temperatures, but still the carbon tax agenda rolls forward. But Lord Monkton of scienceandpublicpolicy.org, thank you so much for joining us. He's a former businessman, newspaper editor, inventor, classical architect, trained orator, and high priest of climate skepticism. He was special advisor to Margaret Thatcher, prime minister from 82 to 86. On leaving 10 Downing, he established a successful specialist consultancy company giving technical advice to corporations and governments. His knowledge of science and politics behind global warming is noted with its breadth and depth. And he's traveled the world, and you can give him credit for waking up Australia to repeal carbon taxes. He is a big deal. And, of course, the media won't make him a big deal because they want to hide what he's done, but he is a big deal. He's a real celebrity of promoting renaissance and freedom worldwide, and we can learn from him successful ways to counter this evil. So he joins us to cover the waterfront. Lord Monkton, we should obviously start first with the tragic killings of 20 people by these radical jihadis in Paris, and then the calls for defending free speech by culprits of attacking free speech.
Well, this is the extraordinary thing. The jihadists did what they did because they didn't like some cartoons about Islam that had appeared in Charlie Hebdo. And so free speech is all very well if you happen to be pro-Islamic, but if you want to say anything that questions Islam, you have to be very careful indeed, or the terrorists will come after you. And of course, the EU has been trying to shut down free speech for some time. If you are an EU functionary, even if you're just a cleaner, it says in your contract that you may not say anything that in any way questions the political desirability or efficiency of the EU, because if you do, they can sack you and penalize you and cost you your pension. They buy the silence of those who work for them. And this includes, of course, the members of the European Parliament itself. They too are beginning to be limited in what they can say about the EU, which makes it rather difficult for my party, UKIP, which now has 24 members of the European Parliament. We are the largest party from Britain in the European Parliament as of last year's elections. And we, as you can imagine, are doing our best, first of all, to defend free speech, then to make sure that in Britain we are free not to let so many Muslim immigrants in if we choose not to. Because at the moment, the EU is adopting what is more or less an open borders policy. People can come in from all over the place. There are virtually no controls unless you try to get into the UK. We still maintain some controls.
Well, that's the socialist game plan with Obama opening the borders to bring in groups that will vote socialist.
Here's the thing. In France, 93% of the 8 or 9 million Muslims who are now in France, how they got there, goodness knows, but there are 8 or 9 million of them. 93% of those voted socialist. And of course, Monsieur Hollande, who's the president of France, came out and said, of course, these terrorist acts have got nothing at all to do with Islam. Well, it's time he came off the Kool-Aid. Of course they are to do with Islam. 95% of all terrorist acts around the world over the last 20 years, including specifically the ones in Paris, were committed in the name of Allah by people shrieking Allahu Akbar. And what is happening? Are the moderate Muslim clerics speaking out and condemning the extremists? This is what worries me. There is a frightening silence from what is supposed to be moderate Islam in the face of these terrorist attacks. And what you get from Hollande, you get a craven statement that this has nothing to do with Islam, when it blindingly obviously has. But of course, he doesn't want to offend those 93% of the 8 or 9 million Muslims in France who voted for him last time. Why does Islam always vote left in those countries where it gets in? The answer, of course, is that Islam is a totalitarian religion, and the left, because Islam votes left, will always open its borders to let more Muslims in. Tony Blair did it. Cameron in Britain, who is indistinguishable from a socialist, he's doing it. They're pouring in on every plane and every boat. Very little steps are being taken to stop it. We do still retain the freedom to stop it, provided they come from anywhere other than Europe. But our trouble is that if they come in from the European Union, then our right to stop them and turn them away is very severely restricted.
And then people like Michael Savage,
we are no longer masters of our own country.
Exactly. And then people like Michael Savage, we're going to skip this network break, who was going to go speak about the threat of radical Islam in England, is banned from entering the UK, and they're adding hundreds of people to it. And I was warned when I came in, they had different groups of police meet me and just show up at the hotel that, hey, you better not criticize Islam while you're here. I'm not somebody that's ever even been attacking, because there are a lot of Muslims that I think are nice people and aren't radical, but you're right. What dominates it is the totalitarian angle, and they've intimidated the non-radical Muslims, and the West seems to be backing radical Muslims through Saudi Arabia, taking over the Middle East and Africa, and so it looks like they are really a protected group. Well, even if I agreed with Islam, I would be mad as a libertarian with the fact that they get special treatment. You're not allowed to criticize them. That's frightening that they let jihadi preachers get up and preach for terror attacks on UK television, but that Michael Savage can't come into the country. That's chilling.
Well, this is something which I think is very dangerous indeed. I'm very sorry that Michael Savage has been banned. Yes, he speaks strongly, as do you, as sometimes do I. But does this mean we ought to be silenced? No. What is happening is that free speech is rapidly vanishing in favor of what is politically correct. And of course, what is politically correct means what is politically left-wing. If it's left-wing, it's correct under this new disposition. And if you're not left-wing, then you are going to be silenced. And they've tried this on the climate, they've tried this on Islam, they're doing it on various subjects. And the danger that I see is that the media, most of which are also now left-wing anyway, are willing to go along with this gradual circumscription of free speech. And of course, you also see it very dangerously indeed in the universities, the places that used to be places of light, of liberty and of learning, in Disraeli's great phrase. Now you can scrub liberty and light and learning. Now it's doctrine, doctrine, and doctrine. Left-wing doctrine, Islamist doctrine, anti-Christian doctrine, anti-Western doctrine throughout the universities. This is a very extraordinary moment for the West, because the West is busy abdicating all the reasons for its greatness. Our freedom of speech, our liberty of expression, our freedom of movement, our freedom of action, our freedom to form and unmake companies, our freedom to keep most of our own earnings, our freedom to say what we want to say, albeit to be polite and not to be libelous, but at least to speak freely. All these freedoms are now almost extinct.
That's right. And the West is committing suicide on the altar of socialist, communist, collectivist failure.
This is the tragedy, because socialism has failed. The welfare state has gone bankrupt everywhere. In the United States, the national debt has doubled in the lifetime of this president in office. We'll call him a president, though he isn't really. Likewise, in the United Kingdom, in the lifetime of just one parliament, only 5 years, the national debt of Britain, which took 250 years to accumulate, has doubled in just 5 years. Why? Because the welfare state is out of control, and part of that, of course, is uncontrolled immigration, and people arriving at the airport going straight to their compatriots who work in the benefit offices, claiming large benefits and free operations on the National Health Service from the British taxpayer, though they have no right to them. The British taxpayer, therefore, has to queue and wait and starve.
Isn't Cloward and Piven the end game? Bankrupt the West and then bring in total collectivism? I mean, this is a nightmare scenario, and as you said, we've had a doubling or an exponential growth in just the last 5 years in the West of debt. Other European countries are going bankrupt as we speak. What is the end game, and how long until it all collapses?
Well, this is a very good question. I have a cousin who is very high up in the financial world, and he reckons about 6 months and it's going to fall apart. He said the debt has gone way beyond what is sustainable. And in Britain, it could even happen sooner, because if, as I suspect we will, we end up with a socialist government after our general elections in May this year, just a few months away now, then the stock market here and then worldwide will collapse more or less immediately. So I'm busy repositioning myself to get out of the stock market into other things. Gold, silver look good. They haven't gone up much in the last 5 years, but I think they suddenly will when everything begins to collapse. It's very good news, of course, that the oil price has fallen. That's actually been a benefit to the Western economies, though paradoxically, the stock markets have gone down in response to that, because they sense, and I think rightly, that there is an instability because the one cartel which is permitted in international law when all others are banned by the World Trade Organization is, of course, the oil cartel. And people are beginning to be reminded that Saudi Arabia still controls that cartel, and it is trying at the moment to shut down all the shale gas and shale oil operations in Canada, in the United States, in Britain, in Poland. Why? Because they don't want to find that we can start drilling for our own oil rather than them selling it to us. So they're trying to knock us out of the market by using their cartel power. And I think it's time that the West stood up to Saudi Arabia, not only, of course, on the oil cartel, but also on the matter of its funding of a particularly extreme version of Islam, the Wahhabist version of Islam, which they're spreading right across the Muslim crescent to the south of Russia, right into Pakistan, and as you said earlier, right down into Africa. Now, I think we have to be careful with our language when we talk about Islam. I don't think we should simply quote the admittedly very extreme passages in the Quran which abrogate the more gentle passages, the passages that say, you should kill non-Muslims wherever you find them and wherever you can. These passages are there. They do take precedence over the moderate passages, but most Muslims, and we must give them credit for this, realize that their holy book in that respect is nonsense, and they do not behave in that way, and they do not support those who do. So I think that, like you, I am a friend of moderate Islam, because in many respects it shares our values. For instance, you and I don't like baby butchering, and nor does official Islam like baby butchering. So we do have some moral standards in common on which I think we should build. But simply to give in to Islam in the way that left-wing governments like that of Monsieur Hollande are doing worldwide, that's when you get terrorism. If you look weak and you have a socialist administration, then in come the terrorists, because they know that you'll get exactly the kind of rhetoric that Hollande came out with, trying to say that this was nothing to do with Islam. This is a real danger. If we cannot get our politicians to speak the truth because they themselves have become frightened by the terrorists, then we need more muscular politicians.
Well, it shows the complete surrender of the socialists who have a 100+% tax rate on the middle class in France. I'm not joking, folks. That's Associated Press. 101% tax rate to fully bankrupt their enemies. And the socialists have been found with Swiss bank accounts, so they're exempt from it, as they always operate as EU dictators. And we use that term. Lord Monkton can back up the statistics. They are dictatorial. Benjamin Netanyahu, it's now being reported, regardless of what you think of him, was told by the French president, don't march with us, but Netanyahu still did it. Regardless, I mean, that shows how much the radical Islamic system has happened, that they're going to tell a foreign president, you can't march with us. I mean, this is really getting bizarre.
Well, it is, and I think it shows the weakness and intellectual bankruptcy of the left worldwide. This is an extraordinary feature of what's going on in the world now. The left are wrong, objectively speaking, about everything. They're wrong to pander to extremist Islam. They're wrong about the climate. They're wrong about the environment. They're wrong about the economy. They're wrong about the welfare state. Wrong on any rational measure. And yet they prevail in all the bureaucratic institutions, most bureaucracies in government, most bureaucracies like the UN, the supranational bureaucracies. These left-wing bureaucracies are under the thumb of the extreme left. And they're wrong about everything, relentlessly, determinedly wrong. And the wronger they are, the shriller they